Roadhog, a hero who has lived or died by the power of Hook. When he can one-shot, it usually means domination and enemy frustration, but when he can't, the pick often becomes useless. Throughout history, Blizzard have adjusted the power of Hog's combo back and forth, with no clear end in sight. In 6v6, he was already problematic enough, but 5v5 seems to have only made things worse. So, what is the history of Roadhog? Why did his rework fail, and is there any hope left, or was he simply doomed from the start? Well, Roadhog was one of the game's original 21 heroes, and his kit was not too different from today. The biggest change could be found in Take a Breather, which was not only a single chunk of healing instead of having a resource bar, but also fully prevented movement. On top of that, it didn't even grant damage reduction, so Hog was actually quite vulnerable during its use. The other main difference involved his gun, which had less ammo and a slower fire rate but dealt more damage. Keep that in mind, it'll be important. Aside from that though, Whole Hog forced you to shoot for its entire duration, and Chain Hook was largely the same as today. Well, maybe not entirely. You've probably heard of it before, but allow me to show you the incredible Hook 1.0. Are you behind a boss? Well, tough luck. Are you perhaps out of sight? Clearly not. Are you behind Roadhog? Well, it doesn't matter. Yep, Hook 1.0 was definitely interesting. First off, it had a huge vertical hitbox. This was apparently an intentional design choice by the devs, but it simply meant you could hook above cover to hit someone. On top of that, the chain never broke, meaning the targets were probably dead no matter what. This hook was incredibly powerful and insanely frustrating to play against, yet it wouldn't be fixed for many months. I'll get onto Hook 2.0 later, but for now let's see how Hog fared with this completely broken ability. At first, Roadhog wasn't perceived to be that strong. Keep in mind, many other parts of his kit were worse than they are now. However, he did have his one-shot. In 2016, Hog actually dealt up to 225 damage without any crits. This meant that most heroes died without even hooking them, yet if you did, their death was all but certain. Let's be honest, this one-shot combo has been the entire essence of Hog since its creation, but back then it was even more powerful. And so, despite Take a Breather being pretty bad, Roadhog quickly rose to being one of the better heroes in the game. That isn't to say he was completely dominant, but his insane kill potential made him a serious threat. As a few months passed, Hog did temporarily fall however. Anno received a decent buff, and she of course countered Roadhog quite well. Plus, people improved their awareness and were thereby harder to hook. Hog wasn't bad during the autumn of 2016, there were just a few more meta picks, yet that too didn't last long. Anno's powerful nano boost had previously created the Beyblade meta, with Reaper going in to make people die. However, the move speed boost that Nano initially granted was removed in November, allowing for other heroes to rise. Namely, the triple tank meta was formed, and Hog benefited in big ways. Despite her nerf, Anno was still powerful, with her high healing output often able to support 3 tanks. And although Hog's main purpose otherwise was to hook and kill weak enemies, his shotgun also made him naturally strong against larger targets. As a result, Roadhog was one of the most powerful heroes at the time. Naturally, something had to change, because Hog was not only powerful, but also infuriating to play against. Hook 1.0 was already annoying enough with its ridiculous pulls, yet that combined with certain death made things so much worse. Instantly dying in a game like Overwatch is never fun, and that only gets exacerbated when it both seems easy to do and it feels like it lacks counterplay. Unfortunately, Hog ticked both boxes. Therefore, an update to Hook was inevitable, and after a long wait, it finally arrived in January of 2017. Blizzard's first attempt at a fix actually came to the public test region in December, but this went too far in the opposite direction. Odd line of sight checks meant that the hook often failed, but a middle ground solution was released in the following month. And for the most part, it was a success. Not perfect, but it did arguably feel better for both sides. Enemies could no longer be pulled through walls, yet they were placed directly in front of Hog for easier follow-up. Now the buggy hook was fixed, and focus could be shifted towards Roadhog's raw power. 1 month after the change, Hook was therefore nerfed, with a spread reduction for Scrap Gun to compensate. This made the one-shot slightly less common, but also made it more even across enemy hero models. Hog's strength did fall slightly as a result, however he wasn't bad, and kills were still easily obtainable if you stepped forward after a hook and meleeed. By early April, the triple tank meta had mostly passed, with dives slowly shifting in. For now, Hog was still popular though, as he honestly wasn't much worse. Plus, if a tank was needed in ranked, he was one of a few who DPS mains could accept switching to. However, due to this high pick rate, Hog remained a common threat, and although Hook was no longer as problematic, the one-shot prevailed, or at least the combo to attain practically the same result. People continue to be frustrated, but at the same time, Hog had nothing else. So what do you do? Remove a one-shot and Roadhog is often useless, or at least feels severely lacking, but keep it and he continues to annoy. This is the essence of Hog's biggest design problem. Realistically, the only true solution is a rework, which Blizzard would try many years into the future. For now though, they would never be able to make up their mind, and Hog has both lost and regained his one-shot several times throughout history. To begin, this meant it would naturally be removed. In June of 2017, Roadhog's damage was decreased by a huge 33%. Some other compensatory buffs were granted, but crucially, far less enemies could be quickly killed. Here is a spreadsheet of the comboable heroes before and after the patch, and these one-hit evaluations include the damage from both hook and melee. As you can tell, far less heroes could be instantly eliminated, so despite the other buffs, Hog's power fell drastically. This then allowed the dive meta to fully take over, since Hog previously kept it in check, and now he was almost the least picked hero in the entire game. Blizzard realized that the previous change perhaps swung things too far, so at the end of August, Take a Breather was significantly buffed. Now it could finally be used while moving and halved all damage received during use. Therefore, despite the lack of one-shot capability still hurting, Hog was otherwise okay. Not great, but at least DPS mains could use him, and he was far more survivable. In fact, at the beginning of 2018, Hog rose back to being among the most popular heroes in ranked. So although he saw somewhat limited professional play at the time, things could have been a lot worse. Moving into mid-2018, Hog's play did unfortunately drop a bit, yet he was back for the Overwatch League playoffs with a respectable 27% pick rate. For now, it seems the lack of one-shot didn't hurt as much as you'd expect. The second half of 2018 was when the GOAT meta began to form, and although Hog is a tank, he unfortunately didn't fit in. As such, his viability dropped, with other tanks simply taking priority and simultaneously denying Hog's value. Buffs were granted in both August and November, however this time Roadhog was actually forced out of favour for an extended period. To be fair, the same could be said for a ton of other heroes, but that's just GOATs for you. This meta then dominated through the end of 2018 into the first half of 2019, so Hog saw quite low play for a good while, especially at the highest ranks. Finally, thanks to some GOATs nerfs and Orisa buffs, things did change around June of 2019. People were simply fed up with the meta which had dominated for so long, and so at least in ranked, but even eventually in the Overwatch League, the top heroes did shift. In regard to the former, Roadhog actually teamed up with Orisa and became one of the best picks. Despite receiving no buffs since November, Hog was apparently strong when the conditions favoured him, and he synergized particularly well with Orisa. Together, they could pull off something known as the pulled pork combo, where the old Halt ability could pull enemies above their protective barriers, making them easy pickings for Chain Hook. The double sniper DPS who were popular also provided pressure from several angles, making Hook even more dangerous. As a result, Hog was the third most played hero in several ranks at one point. For professional play, he took a little longer to arrive, as Roadhog was first added to fully kill GOATs, but now he could be the fifth most picked there as well. Following Rollqu's addition, Sigma was swiftly added to the game, and as you most likely know, the double shield meta was formed. Here, Sigma simply replaced Roadhog since Orisa's barrier was crucial, and just like that, Hog disappeared from pro play. Thankfully, a buff in October kept him temporarily relevant in ranked, at least being third best among tanks. Yet even that would not last long, and although still somewhat popular for most players, Roadhog was completely out of high level play by the end of the year. The meta became to either match double shield or try to counter it, which sounds obvious I know, but Hog was unfortunately capable of neither. Plus the high damage output of other strong heroes could kill him in an instant. Moving into 2020, things weren't looking great for Roadhog. Brawl comps with Ryan at the helm sometimes contested Double Shield for the title of best strategy, but Hog was absent there too. Even with hero pools which banned a few characters each week to constantly shift the meta, Hog still saw basically no play in the Overwatch League. Eventually he got a slight buff in April, but it really didn't do much, and so although not awful, Hog was pretty bad for quite a long period. This is the point when losing that one shot really did feel bad. Sure, Hog had been strong at times without it, but when the meta didn't favour him, that loss became all the more painful. It is therefore that, despite potentially knowing what would happen, Blizzard buffed Hog in August of 2020. Of course, the one shot was back, and as you can guess, chaos ensued. Here's the thing, Hog hasn't been able to consistently hook and kill people since 2017. After that nerf he was really bad, but since then he received a plethora of changes in order to compensate. So now when he suddenly regains the one-shot combo whilst retaining many of the other changes, of course he'd be good. On top of that, Orisa was nerfed at the same time, and although that meant pulled pork was no longer viable, it did finally remove double shield, and fewer shields meant easier hooks. As a result, Roadhog suddenly became the most picked tank in Grandmaster. Meanwhile, the Overwatch League wasn't quite as quick to the trigger, but some teams like the Washington Justice did realize his power. Then, in the Grand Finals, Hog's pick rate rose to a huge 64%. Crazy how a slight damage buff can have such a staggering impact. Roadhog's dominance didn't last long though. Just under a month after the buff, Scrapgun's damage was nerfed in September, and now Hog's raw numbers were even worse than before. It seems that Blizzard panicked slightly with this change because Hog was pretty bad earlier in the year, and now he had the same damage but slower and with less ammo. Therefore, a quick buff was granted 2 weeks later. At this point, it's difficult to tell exactly who Hog could and couldn't combo kill. Although his damage was low, it was technically enough if every shock and pelt hit. Either way though, the changes weren't as bad as you'd expect to begin with. The spread pattern on shotguns was made more consistent, and the general meta environment was still decent for Hog. His weaknesses were exposed eventually, and he did fall early into 2021, but that means he remained solid for a good few months. Regardless, Roadhog did drop in popularity eventually, and so his damage was buffed in April, again. This time it was more of a middle ground value though, so he didn't suddenly take over. Later on in August, another slight buff was granted, and now Hog was in a solid spot all things considered. For the rest of Overwatch 1, he didn't completely dominate, but was still a strong pick. And so, one of Overwatch's biggest problems was somewhat solved. Not to say that Hog was perfect, he was definitely still annoying, but things could have been a lot worse. So why is Hog arguably Overwatch's biggest problem? Well, let's find out in Overwatch 2. Going into the highly anticipated sequel, Roadhog didn't receive many changes, just some extra health and healing. Instead, the biggest shift was that from 5v5 to 6v6, and unfortunately this change will become problematic in a plethora of ways. Hog is what was known as an off-tank, basically meaning that he lacks the frontline presence of a Reinhardt. These heroes instead support the main tank and the rest of their team. Realistically, Hog can't do this either, but he can displace enemies and support through kills. The point is that with only one tank, Roadhog would struggle with drawing aggression and protecting his team. So either he is a raid boss who just kills the enemy first, or both Hog and his team suffer. And in the beta, the latter was true. A buff was granted in May, which changed how his ult worked, but still, the hero was average at best, resulting in practically no play during the Overwatch League of 2022. Fortunately, Hog wasn't bad for long. Upon Overwatch 2's official release, people were still uncertain of his power, but that didn't last. Yet nothing changed, so why was Hog suddenly good? Well, Kiriko. I can just end the video there, right? No? Okay, well, Kiri was added to ranked a couple of weeks following launch, and naturally, she synergized incredibly well with Hog. I haven't talked about it that much so far, but until now, Anna had largely kept Roadhog in check. During Overwatch 1, a second tank could at least block her anti-grenade, but aside from that, she was the perfect counter to Hog. His only sustain came from healing, so if he can't heal, he dies. Simple. Once 5v5 was introduced, this became even more clear and was a big reason as to why Hog was weak during the beta, because if the enemy switched to Anna, there wasn't much the Hog player could do. However, now Kirika arrived with an ability which completely nullified this, allowing Hog to wreak havoc without a worry in the world. Although mostly a curse, 5v5 also ended up blessing Hog to some degree. With fewer enemy tanks and shields, Hook was easier than ever to hit, and the value of a single kill was increased. Plus, with the sequel's release, a lot of crowd control was removed from the game, which only helped further. Hog was now even harder to kill, able to just take a breather and regain half his health. On top of that, he could also combo kill a good number of heroes thanks to the final Overwatch 1 changes. As a result of all this, by Season 2, Hog was arguably the best tank in the game, able to take over lobbies and murder the enemy. He was incredibly frustrating to play against, difficult to kill, yet could easily one-shot you, and now barely had counters. Despite this, it would take until late January of 2023 for a nerf, but this one was huge. Do you want to guess what Blizzard nerfed this time? Was it the damage of Scrap Gun, perhaps the damage of Hook, or was it instead the distance someone was placed after being pulled? What about all three? Yeah, Hog's combo was completely butchered with this patch. And not only was the one-shot now almost impossible, but Hog's general brawling capabilities just weren't good enough anymore. Blizzard were apparently already looking into a rework by now, so this just felt like a poorly made band-aid solution. Because sure, the annoying character was gone and everyone else was safe, but Hog himself was left to suffer. In February, he got a slight buff, and some people were still willing to give him a shot, but it didn't really matter. Over time, he just fell even further as everyone began to agree on how bad Roadhog was. Buffs in both March and June barely made a difference, and Hog was arguably the game's worst hero for like 10 months. Something had to be done, that much was certain. Hog haters may have been happy, but this was not good game design or balance. However, the fabled rework took far longer than expected, and it wasn't until November the changes arrived. So how effective would the rework be? Could it solve Hog's issues of low mobility and utility, thereby making him viable without needing to one-shot? Well, not exactly. Let's have a look. Hog's rework consisted of three main changes. First off, primary and secondary fire were combined into a single shot. Honestly, I have no clue why they did this, I suppose for simplicity. Then Take a Breather began to use its current resource bar, and finally a new ability, Pigpen, was added. Of course, a lot of number changes were made alongside this, but those are the key aspects. So let's evaluate this rework. Did it add mobility? No, but that might be fine. Did it add utility? Well, kind of, but not really. Unfortunately, Pigpen was either a tool to support the Hook combo, or you threw it out and it just got destroyed. So not much utility, to be honest. And finally, did it make Hog viable without needing to one-shot? Well, following a quick buff, it did make him viable, but as I just mentioned, the one-shot was still basically all he had. After such a long time, the only thing Blizzard did was re-add the one-shot, again, just with extra steps. Aside from that, I suppose the change to heal was decent, but that kind of gets cancelled out by the removal of secondary fire in my opinion. Anyways, at least Roadhog had escaped the pit of weakness, finally being a decent pick in regular ranked. But after all this time, I don't think that was enough. Moving into 2024, Hog did get a healing nerf in January, which hurt a little, but he was roughly the same. Then came Season 9 and its changes to health pools and projectile sizes. However, Hog got no compensatory changes to his damage, and could once again no longer hook and kill enemies. So guess what? He was bad. Crazy, I know. On top of that, the new DPS passive which applied healing reduction also hits hard, so that is something to consider. Therefore, buffs were granted in both February and March, putting him back to okay. That too wouldn't last long. In May, a new tank roll passive was added, granting increased knockback resistance and critical damage reduction. These benefited Hog greatly, and so instead of dominating due to a one-shot, he dominated by becoming a raid boss. The new Roadhog unfortunately still could not help his team directly, but he could just stay alive. The changes to Take a Breather made Hog far more survivable, and when combined with a new passive, he became a true tank. Naturally, he couldn't one-shot, but still had enough damage to be a threat. So was this the true solution? Because Hog was now strong without needing the one-shot? Well, no. Having an enemy who is impossible to kill unless you pick one specific hero isn't very fun either, and this version of Hog had several other issues. He still only had one way of creating space, was generally far too inconsistent, and wasn't punished for failure like almost everyone else. On top of that, Pigpen didn't fix much, it just made Hog useless when on cooldown, but tried to enable the frustrating hook combo playstyle. As you can tell, the rework still wasn't really a success. Moving on, due to his dominance, Hog received significant nerfs in May and June, returning him to below average. Buffs were then granted in July and September, but he was still relatively weak for the rest of 2024. In 2025, perks were added, and Roadhogs were okay. Not bad, but not good enough to make him strong. Buffs then came in March, partly re-adding the combo once again, but then the perk which enabled it got removed in April. During this time, Hog was decent in ranked, and absolutely usable by the best of his mains, but practically useless in professional play. And so we arrive at the rework. In August of 2025, Hog's previous rework was largely reverted except for the change to his heal. This was positive overall and a good sign that Blizzard could admit their mistakes. Many Hog players were happy with the return of secondary fire, and technically this was a step in the right direction. It doesn't change the fact that Roadhog's problems remain unsolved to this day, but perhaps Blizzard will fix him eventually. I can't say I envy their task. Following these changes, Hog was a bit weak, so received some quick buffs, but is still not great. He can actually combo kill a good number of heroes if you step forward after the hook, yet honestly, he often has been able to. Despite all the discussion around the one-shot, it's not like the hook combo has been irrelevant following nerfs. I mean, that's like half of a hero's kit. If the enemy was already slightly weak, if your teammates helped, if you hit an extra shot before the hook, Hog still got kills. However, it's all about the consistency, because real games are not like the firing range, and Hog really needs kills to get value. But maybe that means his entire hero identity is flawed from a balancing perspective. Whether or not he's Overwatch's biggest problem is uncertain, yet he is definitely up there, and we'll just have to wait and see if Blizzard can ever solve him. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Thank you so much for all of your support this year, and I'll see you next time.